"We just come in," said Lenny softly. Curly stared levelly at him. "Well, next time you answer when you're spoken to." He turned toward the door and walked out, and his elbows were still bent out a little. George watched him go, and then he turned back to the swamper. "Say, what the heck's he's got on his shoulder? Lenny didn't do nothing to him." The old man looked cautiously at the door to make sure no one was listening. "That's the boss's son," he said quietly. "Curly's pretty handy. He done quite a bit in the ring. He's a lightweight, and he's handy." "Well, let him be handy," said George. "You don't have to take after Lenny. Lenny didn't do nothing to him. What's he got against Lenny?" The swamper considered. "Well, tell you what. Curly's like a lot of little guys. He hates big guys. He's all the time picking scraps with big guys. Kind of like he's mad at him because he ain't a big guy. You seen little guys like that, ain't you? Always scrappy." "Sure," said George. "I seen plenty of tough little guys. But this Curly better not make no mistakes about Lenny. Lenny ain't handy, but this Curly punk is going to get hurt if he messes around with Lenny." "Well, Curly's pretty handy," the swamper said skeptically. "Never did seem right to me. S'pose Curly jumps a big guy and licks him. Everybody says what a game guy Curly is. And suppose he does the same thing and gets licked. And everybody says the big guy ought to pick somebody their own size, and maybe they gang up on the big guy. Never did seem right to me. Seems like Curly ain't giving nobody a chance." George was watching the door. He said ominously, "Well, he better watch out for Lenny. Lenny ain't no fighter, but Lenny's strong and quick, and Lenny don't know no rules." He walked to the square table and sat down on one of the boxes. He gathered some of the cards together and shuffled them. The old man sat down on another box. "Don't tell Curly I said none of this. He'd slough me. He just don't give a darn. Won't ever get canned 'cause his old man's the boss." George cut the cards and began turning them over, looking at each one and throwing it down on a pile. He said, "This guy Curly sounds like a jerk to me. I don't like mean little guys." "Seems to me like he's worse lately," said the swamper. "He got married a couple of weeks ago. Wife lives over in the boss's house. Seems like Curly is cockier than ever since he got married." George grunted. "Maybe he's showing off for his wife." Swamper warmed to his gossip. "You seen that glove on his left hand?" "Yeah, I seen it." "Well, that glove's full of Vaseline." "Vaseline? What the heck for?" "Well, I'll tell you what. Curly says he's keeping that hand soft for his wife." George studied the cards absorbedly. "That's a dirty thing to tell around," he said. The old man was reassured. He had drawn a derogatory statement from George. He felt safe now, and he spoke more confidently. "Wait till you see Curly's wife." George cut the cards again and put out a solitaire lay, slowly and deliberately. "Purty?" he asked casually. "Yeah, purty, but—" George studied his cards. "But what?" "Well, she got the eye." "Yeah? Married 2 weeks and got the eye? Maybe that's why Curly's pants is full of ants. I seen her give Slim the eye. Slim's a jerk-line skinner. Heck of a nice fella. Slim don't need to wear no high-heeled boots on a grain team. I seen her give Slim the eye. Curly never seen it. And I seen her give Carlson the eye." George pretended a lack of interest. "Looks like we was gonna have fun." Swamper stood up from his box. "Know what I think?" George did not answer. "Well, I think Curly's married. A tart." "He ain't the first," said George. "There's plenty done that." The old man moved toward the door, and his ancient dog lifted his head and peered about, and then got painfully to his feet to follow. "I gotta be setting out the wash basins for the guys. The teams will be in before long. You guys gonna buck barley?" "Yeah." "You won't tell Curly nothing I said?" "Heck no." "Well, Well, you look over her, mister. You see if she ain't a tart. He stepped out the door into the brilliant sunshine. George laid down his cards thoughtfully, turned his pile of 3. He built 4 clubs on his ace pile. The sun square was on the floor now, and the flies whipped through it like sparks. The sound of jingling harness and the croak of heavy-laden axles sounded from outside. From the distance came a clear call. "Stable Buck! Oh, Stable Buck!" And then, "Where the heck is that darn Stable Buck?" George stared at his solitaire lay. Then he flounced his cards together and turned around to Lenny. Lenny was laying down on the bunk watching him. "Look, Lenny, this here ain't no setup. I'm scared. You're gonna have trouble with that Curly guy. I've seen his kind before. He was kind of feeling you out. He figures he's got you scared and he's gonna take a suck at you the first chance he gets." Lenny's eyes were frightened. "I don't want no trouble," he said plaintively. "Don't let him sock me, George." George got up and went over to Lenny's bunk and sat down on it. "I hate that kind of jerk," he said. "I seen plenty of 'em. Like the old guy says, Curly don't take no chances. He always wins." He thought for a moment. "If he tangles with you, Lenny, we're gonna get the can. Don't make no mistake about that. He's the boss's son. Look, Lenny, you try to keep away from him, will you? Don't never speak to him. And if he comes in here, you move clear to the other side of the room. Will you do that, Lenny?" "I don't want no trouble," Lenny mourned. "I never done nothing to him." "Well, that won't do you no good if Curly wants to plug himself up for a fighter. Just don't have nothing to do with him. Will you remember?" "Sure, George. I ain't gonna say a word." The sound of the approaching grain teams was louder, thud of big hoofs on hard ground, drag of brakes and the jingle of trace chains. Men were calling back and forth from the teams. George, sitting on the bunk beside Lenny, frowned as he thought. Lenny asked timidly, "You ain't mad, George?" "I ain't mad at you. I'm mad at this here Curly jerk. I hoped we was going to get a little stake together. Maybe $100. You keep away from Curly, Lenny." "Sure I will, George. I won't say a word." "Don't let him pull you in, but if the son of a gun socks you, let him have it." "Let him have what, George?" Never mind. I'll tell you when. I hate that kind of a guy. Look, Lenny, if you get in any kind of trouble, you remember what I told you to do?" Lenny raised up on his elbow, his face contorted with thought. Then his eyes moved sadly to George's face. "If I get in any trouble, you ain't gonna let me tend the rabbits." "That's not what I meant. You remember where we slept last night, down by the river?" "Oh, yeah, I remember." "Oh, sure, I remember. I go there and hide in the brush. Hide till I come for you. Don't let nobody see you. Hide in the brush by the river. Say that over. Hide in the brush by the river, down in the brush by the river. If you get in trouble, if I get in trouble." A brake screeched outside. A call came. "Stable Buck, oh Stable Buck." George said, "Say it over to yourself, Lenny, so you won't forget it." Both men glanced up, for the rectangle of sunshine in the doorway was cut off. A girl was standing there, looking in. She had full, rogued lips and wide-spaced eyes, heavily made up. Her fingernails were red. Her hair hung in little rolled clusters like sausages. She wore a cotton house dress and red mules, on the insteps of which were little bouquets of red ostrich feathers. "I'm looking for Curly," she said. Her voice had a nasal, brittle quality. George looked away from her and then back. "He was in here a minute ago, but he went." "Oh!" She put her hands behind her back and leaned against the doorframe so that her body was thrown forward. "You're the new fellas that just come, ain't you?" "Yeah." Lenny's eyes moved down over her body, and though she did not seem to be looking at Lenny, she bridled a little. She looked at her fingernails. "Sometimes Curly's in here," she explained. George said brusquely, "Well, he ain't here now." "If he ain't, I guess I better look someplace else," she said playfully. Lenny watched her, fascinated. George said, "If I see him, I'll pass the word he was looking for him." She smiled archly and twitched her body. "Nobody can blame a person for looking," she said. There were footsteps behind her, going by. She turned her head. "Hi, Slim," she said. Slim's voice came through the door. "Hi, good looking." "Trying to find Curly, Slim." "Well, you ain't trying very hard. I seen him going in your house." She was suddenly apprehensive. "Bye, boys," she called into the bunkhouse, and she hurried away. George looked around at Lenny. "Jesus, what a tramp," he said. "So that's what Curly picks for a wife?" "She's purty," said Lenny defensively. "Yeah, and she's sure hiding it. Curly got his work ahead of him. Bet she'd clear out for $20. Lenny still stared at the doorway where she had been. Gosh, she was purty. He smiled admiringly. George looked quickly down at him, and then took him by the ear and shook him. "Listen to me, you crazy jerk," he said fiercely. "Don't you even take a look at that gal. I don't care what she says and what she does. I seen 'em poisoned before, but I never seen no piece of jailbait worse than her. You leave her be." Lenny tried to disengage his ear. "I never did nothing, George." "No, you never. But when she was standing in the doorway showing her legs, you wasn't looking the other way neither." "I never meant no harm, George. Honest, I never." "Well, you keep away from her. She's a rat trap if I ever seen one. You let Curly take the rap. He let himself in for it. Glove full of Vaseline. And I bet he's eating raw eggs and right into the patent medicine houses." Lenny cried out suddenly. "I don't like this place, George. This ain't no good place. I want to get out of here." "We gotta keep it till we get a stake. We can't help it, Lenny. We'll get out just as soon as we can. I don't like it no better than you do." He went back to the table and set out a new solitaire hand. "No, I don't like it," he said. "For 2 bits I'd shove out of here. If we can get just a couple dollars in the poke, we'll shove off and go up the American River and pan gold. We can make maybe a couple of dollars a day there, and we might hit a pocket." Lenny leaned eagerly toward him. "Let's go, George. Let's go get out of here. It's mean here." "We gotta stay," said George shortly. "Shut up now. The guys will be coming in." From the washroom nearby came the sound of running water and rattling basins. George studied the cards. "Maybe we ought to wash up," he said, "but we ain't done nothing to get dirty." A tall man stood in the doorway. He held a crushed Stetson hat under his arm while he combed his long, black, damp hair straight back. Like the others, he wore blue jeans and a short denim jacket. When he had finished combing his hair, he moved into the room, and he moved with a majesty achieved only by royalty and master craftsmen. He was a jerk-line skinner, the prince of the ranch, capable of driving 10, 16, even 20 mules with a single line to the leaders. He was capable of killing a fly on the wheeler's butt with a bullwhip without touching the mule. There was a gravity in his manner, and a quiet so profound that all talk stopped when he spoke. His authority was so great that his word was taken on any subject, be it politics or love. This was Slim, the jerk-line skinner. His hatchet face was ageless. He might have been 35 or 50. His ear heard more than was said to him, and his slow speech had overtones not of thought, but of understanding beyond thought. His hands, large and lean, were as delicate in their actions as those of a temple dancer. He smoothed out his crushed hat, creased in the middle, and put it on. He looked kindly at the two in the bunkhouse. "It's brighter than a bitch outside," he said gently. "Can't hardly see nothing in here. You the new guys?" "Just come," said George. "Gonna buck barley?" "That's what the boss says." Slim sat down on a box across the table from George. He studied the solitaire hand that was upside down to him. "Hope you get on my team," he said. His voice was very gentle. "I got a pair of punks on my team that don't know a barley bag from a blue ball. You guys ever bucked any barley?" "Heck yes," said George. "I ain't nothing to scream about, but that big jerk there can put up more grain alone than most pears can." Lenny, who had been following the conversation back and forth with his eyes, smiled complacently at the compliment. Slim looked approvingly at George for having given the compliment. He leaned over the table and snapped the corner of a loose card. "You guys travel around together?" His tone was friendly. invited confidence without demanding.